Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my absolute pleasure to have as my guest Dr. Joanne Cacciatore. Dr. Jo is a Zen priest, the founder of the international NGO the MISS Foundation, author of the award-winning bestseller Bearing the Unbearable, Love, Loss, and the Heartbreaking Path of Grief, professor at Arizona State University, and a bereaved mom since the death of her daughter Cheyenne in 1994. She is also the founder of the Selah Care Farm, the first care farm for the traumatically bereaved in the U.S., and a haven for animals rescued from abuse, neglect, and torture. She is an acclaimed public speaker and provides expert consulting services in the area of traumatic loss. Her research has been published in peer-reviewed journals such as the Lancet, Social Work and Healthcare, and Death Studies, among others. Dr. Jo, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. I've been looking forward to our conversation for some time now.
Me too. Thank you. It's so good to be here and get to have a chat with you for the next hour.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. And I mentioned in my series of emails to you that I've been an admirer of your work from afar. And I also read your recent article today, which I thought was quite profound on the
AI.
the AI, which, talking to other individuals, biggest concern so much now for young adults and everybody else is not so much the impact of social media, but the impact of AI. And
Yeah.
particularly how that depersonalizes the intimacy and what we need, particularly to hold space for individuals who are grieving. So I thought the article was profound, and I plan on posting a link to that in the episode notes when we go live.
Well, thank you. Well, yeah, when I read it, I was like, God, this sounds like The Onion. I mean, this can't be real. Can we use AI to make grief obsolete so that people we love never actually die? They just continue in a simulation. And I'm like, oh, what? It's dystopic. I mean, I just don't understand. But grief is so natural and so very important to our being on this planet. I don't want to say to our humanity because even non-humans grieve.
Yep.
So it's just such a natural part of our existence. And so it was sent to me by Grace's mom, Sarah, this morning. I have been interviewed about it before. A few years ago, I was interviewed about a similar thing. They didn't quite call it death bots. That's what they're calling this, death bots. They didn't call it that, but they were, saying, like, what if you could continue a relationship with your person who died, via AI? And I was like, oh, I would want some real serious guardrails around that. So I've talked about it before, but now it's coming to fruition, and here it is. And this particular person in the throes of his grief really wanted to stay connected to his mother, and I guess has conversations with his mother who died. And, and I don't need an AI for that. Like, I have conversations with my daughter who died all the time. She doesn't talk back to me necessarily, except in my mind, but that's part of my practice. That's part of parenting a child who died, is learning how to feel their absence while also invoking their presence, right?
Absolutely. It's staying connected that allows us to navigate the muddy waters of grief. For
Yeah.
me, staying connected to my daughter and keeping her in my heart, integrating the best parts of her into my being and moving forward with her symbolically and literally in grief has allowed me to work through grief while maintaining that relationship. And I doubt, Dr. Jo, the dentist class had AI in mind when he talked about continued bonds.
Correct. Oh, I'm quite sure. I know Dr. Class and Denny would never have I don't even, I'm sure he probably has seen this. I should probably send him a copy of this. Here's a new twist on continuing bonds. But the reality is, it's this idea that we shouldn't have to grieve. And that to me is just furthering the grief avoidance. We have so much grief avoidance in so many societies around the world. Substances, of course, illicit and street and prescription substances, shopping. I actually, my colleague and I just published a paper or are publishing a paper on grief avoidance, increasing impulsive and compulsive consumerism, gambling, pornography, food, all of these things that we use to take ourselves out of our feelings when all we have to do is just fully inhabit our grief. I know it's painful. We both lost our daughters. It's painful. It's painful beyond what words could describe. I get that. We've been through it. And also humans have been doing this since the beginning of time. We know how to bear the unbearable, if you will. And also it's important that we have others around us to support us. So we don't, I don't want to let other people off the hook either, because this is not, loss doesn't occur in a vacuum. We really have to have a circle around us. We need to have compassionate others around us.
Absolutely. I mean, humans weren't meant to get through trauma on their own. We need community. Regardless of the nature of that trauma, we need community to help us transcend it. And we need a community that's going to support our connections to our loved ones as well, too, to allow that ongoing connection. I always think, Dr. Joe of Morris Schwartz, who said, death ends a life, not a relationship. And that is so appropriate for what I believe is, for lack of a better term, healthy grieving. And
Yeah.
you're right. I mean, love and sadness can coexist. I've learned that.
Yeah.
I tried to push away my sadness. There was a time 2.5 years into my journey after, and I call it the transition of my daughter, Janine, from the physical world to the spiritual world, that I just got sick of being a bereaved parent. I said, I don't want to do this anymore. I want my life back the way it was. So I cut myself off from my support group. I basically tried to distract myself through work, and I ended up being miserable because, you can only run so much from the pain. The pain's going to catch up. And so I finally learned that, well, I had to make friends with it, and I had to learn from it, and I had to work through it. And now the painful moments provide me, that I still have, almost 23 years later, provide me as much clarity as the good moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I always tell people, if I woke up tomorrow morning, it's been 32 years, almost 32 years since Cheyenne died. And if I woke up tomorrow morning and felt no grief at all, no longing for her, no, oh, I wish she was here, none of that, I I wouldn't be okay with that. Like, no, no, that would be really weird to me. There's a price to pay for avoiding our grief. Actually, a high price to pay, not just emotionally, but also socially, somatically, physically in our bodies, in every way, spiritually. There's a price that we have to pay for the dance that we do to avoid. And we might be able to avoid for a little while, but at some point, it either catches up to us, or then we end up being unable to avoid the deleterious or the harmful outcomes of trying to avoid, just the suffering we add unnecessarily because we're trying to avoid our suffering.
yep.
It just makes no sense.
Well, and, we live in this society where, the message is, being super positive, being super happy is the key to fulfillment. And I tell my students in my death, dying, and bereavement class, I don't hang around with totally happy people anymore. I,
Kind of boring, actually.
it is, I can sit down, Dr. Joe, with somebody and I can ask them, Joe, how's your day going so far? And they say, today my day sucks. Great, let's have a conversation, because they're being genuine with their emotions.
Right.
And I think of Debbie Ford's work, the late Debbie Ford's work with the Dark Side of the Light Chasers, where she basically embraced Carl Jung's shadow element and essentially put together a roadmap in terms of how you can embrace shadow to lead a more fulfilled life and a more genuine life. And one of the things that she said that always stuck with me is that we are a microcosm of the macrocosm. We have every potential emotion, thought, state of being known to humankind. And we are in service to each other when we can genuinely reflect that to each other, because it becomes a learning experience and genuineness. And we can learn that we can embrace all emotions, and every emotion has something to teach us and in some ways a gift for us. And that type of genuineness is going to help us get through the muddy moments. And the best spiritual work that I have awareness that I've seen people come through has been because of just enlightenment and, bells ringing from the beyond. It's getting in the muck and doing the
That's
really,
it.
the dark work, getting right in the
Yeah.
muck and getting right
Yep.
down to it.
Yep. You got to sweat it out. You got to work it out. You got to, often the metaphor, we have the Selah Care Farm here.
Yes.
And it's such a great metaphor because, this place wasn't built without a lot of blisters and injuries and, throwing tools on the ground and crying and, but it's worth it. This is what we invest. The amount of energy that you put into grief is the amount that you get back from grief. We have to invest in ourselves and in I always used to tell people early on, I went to a number of counselors, trying many counselors. I was a little counselor promiscuous. And because I couldn't find anyone who suited my needs, which is also terrifying. But I remember saying to one, I think he was the third one, our love, my love for my daughter, our love that we share is worth every tear I shed. And you are not going to take that away from me. And that's, even with my knees skinned and my elbows bloodied and I'm sweating and I'm crying and and I know I don't want to have to do this, but I know this is my work. It is my sacred work and I must do it. I don't have a choice.
Yeah, we don't have any control or say in terms of the challenges that are going to befall us in this life. It's how we respond to those. If I could have Dr. Joe had any other challenge other than the transition of my daughter to put me on the path of service and trying to help others, hold space for others who are going through their own challenges. If I could have learned from somebody else's tragedy and incorporated that revised mindset, and not gone through my own, I would have been gladly done that, but
Yeah, of
it didn't
course.
happen. So now I can do one or two things. I could wallow in the muck or I can wallow through it. So I decided to wallow through it, like you and others have opted to do.
Well, and there's a certain time period where we need to just wallow and
Yes.
just, sit still and just be and feel. And then there's also a place where, okay, now what am I doing with this? How is this transmuting? How is this showing up in the world? And how do I choose to bring my daughter, your daughter? How do we choose to bring them forward with us? And of course, it always circles back because even 32 years later, I have days where I just want to stay in bed and pull the covers over my head and throw a tantrum and kick my feet and say, I don't want this, like you said, like, I don't want this. Listen,
Yeah.
why? And I go through it and let it move and then it moves. And then I'm out doing the thing. And then it comes back around and then I'm out doing the thing again. That's the ebb and flow of grief especially when it's catastrophic, when it's your child who's died. This is, sure, I was sad when my grandmother died. She was 86. It's sad. Of course, I had grief. But for me, it was a very different thing than my child dying. And so, for me, not all my griefs are equal. And so I really needed space to feel my feelings. And I wished I would have had more people around me who could hold that. I didn't at the time. I do now. Well, and I have animals who hold things for me now. But I'll tell you, I don't know that I would be where I am today if I had to suppress, inhibit, avoid, or deny my grief. If I did not know how to fully inhabit my grief, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be who I am today.
Yeah. And I would second that motion for myself if I decided not to make friends with my grief, to inhabit it, to allow it to fully affect me, and to transcend it, I wouldn't be where I am today either. And I wouldn't, and the growth always usually occurs through our greatest challenges. So, and
Well, right. We don't grow when we're comfortable, right?
no.
Why would we?
I mean, a lot of people would think we like to grow when we were comfortable, but it isn't about being comfortable. It's about being transcended and, transcending, the curveballs that life tends to throw us, when we're not least expecting it. So, hey, wanted to ask you more about the Selah Care Farm, and I was drawn to the work you do at the Selah Care Farm. I was talking to you before, before we were recording today about, my daughter Janine being a caretaker for Spring Care Farms, and Spring Care takes in animals who have been abused, neglected, have physical health care challenges, and have no other place to go. How did your vision for the Selah Care Farm manifest? What are the services that you provide? And I would ask you this right at all at once. What can animals provide to grieving humans that in many ways humans can't provide for each other?
Okay. Well, let me start with that last question because it touches on something that I love to talk about. That's my research. But I promise not to bore you because it's really interesting research. So I was working with a graduate student who wanted to conduct a study about social support. I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of studies on social support. We know social support and bereavement is good, lack is bad. So how can we study this in a way that's novel or interesting? And I thought, well, you know what? Let's let grieving people define what social support is, because I don't know that there is actually a study out there that allows that true experts, grieving people, to define what social support and grief means to them. And then let's go beyond that and ask them who are the best providers of that kind of support. So the first thing that we learned, which was very interesting, was that what grievers want more than any other kind of support, more than practical support, informational support, appraisal support, more than people making meals, more than people cleaning their houses, what they want was emotional support and emotional acts of caring. And I was like, oh, yeah. Overwhelmingly in the data, emotional support and emotional acts of caring dominated the data. It's an open access study, so anyone can look me up and, just Google my name, and it's called Good Grief Support, The Actors and Actions, or something like that. I can't remember the exact title, but it's out there, which I found really fascinating. So then we went to the next level and said, and who is providing the best support to you out of all of these groups? And we asked about family and friends and spiritual community and coworkers. We asked about neighbors, colleagues. We asked about mental health providers and social workers and medical providers. We asked about every human group, funeral directors, everybody who could possibly interact with grieving people. So the bad news is most people, the vast majority of categories scored under 50% satisfaction. They really stunk. The highest rated group was support groups that came in, I think, at like 62%. But coming in at a whopping 89% were pets and animals. 89% satisfaction, blowing every human group out of the water. And I just went, I mean, I love animals. I've always loved animals. I haven't eaten an animal since 1972. So very few people love animals as much as me. But I got to tell you, I just looked at those data and I was like, what? That's incredible. The spiritual community came in at, I think, 40 something percent. And hospital social workers came in at 32, I think, 32% satisfaction. I'm in the school of social work. This is wildly disappointing to me.
Mm-hmm.
So animals just outperformed us. And I thought, okay, can people tell me why? So we went back through and we asked the people who rated the animals the highest, can you qualify for us what was it about the animals? And there were 4 discrete categories, but the main category was their presence. They were attuned to the grieving person. They didn't turn away. They didn't avoid. When the grieving person would start sobbing or wailing, their dog or their cat would come up and lay next to them and sit with them the whole time. And there are very few humans who will actually do that for us, right? So it really is just their capacity to be present. They have this spaciousness about them, this non-judgmental. And of course, they're not encumbered by the stupid words that pop into our head, as human beings. We have language, which is both a gift and a curse. And we feel like sometimes we have to say wise things to comfort people. And it ends up getting us in trouble because it backfires. It's not usually helpful to tell someone, God needed an angel to tend his garden, or everything happens for a reason, or aren't you glad it was your youngest child? Aren't you glad it was your oldest child? I mean, the things that people hear are staggering to me. I'm always so shocked by it. Animals say none of those things.
No. And they don't. They just, and the power of presence is so important. And books have been written on the power of presence. I think Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, they talked about expert companionship, which is about being present and, being present for somebody's story and sitting through, sitting through and witnessing their worst pain without judgment. And animals can do that. I mean, and plus they're energy sensitive. They're very intuitive. And they will, I've always said that the pets I've had in my life, Dr. Joe, I didn't pick them. They picked me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That.
And the other thing you mentioned earlier, the pets do grieve, and they do. I mean,
Animals grieve, just
Yes.
generally, animals
Yes.
grieve. I mean, our
Yeah.
horses here grieve. We lost one of our goats 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. And she has a brother who lives here. We always rescue in family groups. We never separate families. So we had a brother and sister goat. We rescued Gretel, and Captain Von Trapp is his name. We call him Captain. So Captain and Gretel ate together, slept together. They ran around the farm together. They were always together, always together. And Gretel got sick. It's a long story. Gretel ended up dying. We had her separated, and she ended up dying. And Captain, her brother, this normally very happy, very charismatic goat, and he would walk around the farm with his head bobbing and his tail wagging. And he completely changed for about 6 to 8 months. He was a completely different goat. He was morose. He walked around with his head down. He would just, every once in a while, he would just let out this cry that would echo across the farm. And I knew it was him calling for Gretel. It was very sad, but also, of course, he's grieving. He loved Gretel. He was attached to Gretel. And that's what happens. And animals do get attached. And so you're right. They feel. And also that was another thing that came out. It wasn't as prevalent in the data. Remember, I said presence was one of the things that the animals brought. But the other thing that people talked about was that the animals shared their grief. In other words, the person who died, the animal missed them too. And the grieving person could tell that the animal missed, their child who died, or their parent who died, or their sibling who died. And that was very powerful for people to have this shared grief with this companion animal.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, I had multiple cats in my house, and when one of the cats transitioned to Rainbow Bridge, there was definitely effects in the behavior of the other cats. They would become, as you mentioned, more morose. They would, their appetite would decrease a little bit.
Yeah.
They would become more lethargic. So I
Yep.
made sure I gave them a little extra love and care.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I tell my students about, if you're doing a loss history on an individual who's presenting with traumatic grief, it's important to understand the impact of pet loss on their human losses, because if a human predeceased a pet and then that they were connected to, and that pet then transitions, that brings up, again, feelings of grief with the human. So it's important to assess not only human loss, but pet loss as well, and the impact that it may have on grief, after that pet transitions. So
Yeah, that's true. I work with a bereaved mom whose young son died of cancer, and he had a dog he really, really loved. And when that dog died, she reached out to me and said, I'm not handling this. What is going on? And I'm like, well, because this is part of him, right? I mean, yes, you're grieving for your animal that you love, but also it's even more amplified because it's part of your son. this is part of Blake, and this is part of your love for him. And this is a tangible emotional artifact that connects you to him.
Absolutely. And then when that pet dies, then that grief's going to resurface.
Yeah.
And that's something.
Sometimes very surprisingly strongly, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I want to just shift to your book for a second.
Okay.
Bearing the Unbearable. First of all, in reading the book, and I reread it just about a month or so before we came on the podcast, I think your ability to demonstrate genuine presence for individuals who were grieving came out, and your ability to empathize in a very deep way came out. So I wanted to I mean, and the stories that you shared were just absolutely, they brought chills to me, and it was very emotional reading it. But I got to talk to you about Shamako in terms of the circumstances, the serendipity that brought you to Shamako. And I know Shamako is a part of the Selah Care Farm now still, correct?
He is.
So that was one of, and also Mags, your other dog. Those two stories really hit home for
Mag's
me.
story is really crazy, right?
Yeah.
You want me to start with Shamako's story?
You could start with Shamako. You can go anywhere you want. Shamako, Mags, Dr. Joe, whatever moves you.
I'll start with Shamako because Shamako is how the Care Farm started. We call him our CEO, our Chief Equine Officer. We don't know his age, but I met him on a trail. I was going on a hike that I had wanted to go on my entire life. I saw a picture in a magazine when I was a little girl of this place, and I was like, I want to hike here one day. I just knew I wanted to. My parents weren't outdoorsy people, so I knew I wouldn't get to do it in childhood. And then I became a mom, and then I had a bunch of kids, and then I'm like, I just never had the time. So for my 50th birthday, this is 10 years ago. So yeah, I'm 60. And so for my 50th birthday, my gift to myself was to hike this place. And I trained for it. It's quite a hike. It's a pretty grueling hike. And so I trained for it and had my backpack and my tent, and I was ready to go. It was 5:30 in the morning, and we were there with friends, and we started the hike. And as I came around the first corner, as I came around a curve, I looked down into the canyon because you have to hike way down. And as I looked down, I noticed pack animals being used, horses. And I'm not a fan of that anyway. I'm just not a fan of that. I think humans should probably pack their own gear. So I said to my girlfriend, I said, the horses are okay, right? Like they're well fed, because how I am. I will freak out. We came around an actual first corner, and a horse had fallen down, and the man who was handling the horse was kicking him and hitting him in the face, trying to get him up. The horse's head was bleeding and knees were bleeding, and his entire back was full of tents and coolers and backpacks and human garbage. And it took a second. I didn't react right away initially because I didn't even it took my brain a second to figure out, what am I looking at here? And then I started screaming, stop it, stop it, stop it. And the man said, he's lazy. And I said, he's bleeding, he's hurt. I, at this point, hadn't seen what was underneath the packs. So I started crying because I cry very easily. And I think that scared the guy. And so he took the other horses and he went up to the top, which was right around the next corner. And I'm there with this horse, my husband and our friends. And I'm like, what do? We can't leave this horse here. And so I'm giving the horse water, and I'm, trying to find something to feed this horse. And he was having trouble breathing. So I had them take the packs off of his back because he had a lot of weight on his back. And it was then that we saw that all of that stuff was on a wooden frame that was directly on his skin. And he had been working probably for years this way. The bone was actually coming through the skin on his spine was coming through the bone, through the skin. From the end of his mane to his tail, his entire back was just shredded. And then on the sides, He had wounds that were open down to the muscle. And I just have never seen anything like it. And plus he was 700 pounds underweight. I mean, he was like on death's door. And I couldn't even fathom. I could hardly breathe. I literally was like almost like a whirling dervish. I stood up and held my head and just started turning around in a circle because I was just so overwhelmed with what we were seeing. So I sent Dave, my husband Dave, I sent him up and I said, go buy the horse. So long story short, we were not able to buy the horse. The horse was not for sale. And I couldn't, there's no way I could go on vacation. Like there was no way. So we left and I said to Chamaco, who was not named at that point, I looked in his eyes before I left and I said, you remember me because I'm coming back for you. And it was 3 days later. I made a lot of phone calls and raised a lot of hell. And 3 days later, I got the call that we could come and get him. And so they did. They went and got him and brought him back home. And he stumbled. He was very weak. The vet wouldn't even come for 2 weeks because the vet's like, I don't think this horse is going to make it. So he stumbled off the trailer and there were about 7 of us waiting for him in a line. And he let out this whinny, this little whinny when he saw me and he walked right over to me. And he's been with me ever since. And he's an amazing, very powerful being. He doesn't like to be touched. I mean, he lets me touch him, but he doesn't like anybody else to touch him. But if you just stand next to Chamaco, he is so incredibly powerful. He is really something. I can't even describe him. So he's the reason the Selah Care Farm came to be. I at the time was working with 4, maybe 5 Native clients. I work with a lot of Indigenous people. And one of my Native clients asked, who was very willing to open up with me and share with me the story of her child's death, but also contained, emotionally contained. And she asked me, this is about a week after his rescue, she asked me, can I go out there and sit with your horse, Dr. Joe? And I said, absolutely. I said, do you want me to come with you or do you want to go alone? And she said, no, I'll go alone. And I said, okay. So my office this was before the farm. My office was right here. And then we had this little corral for him right here. He didn't move much at the time because he was so near death. But she went in, I got her set up. I put her on a bench and then I left and went back to my office. And I think probably 5 or 10 minutes later, I hear her sobbing, just bellowing, weeping, and I looked out and Chamaco was standing with his head in her knees and she was holding his face, just sobbing. And I thought, he's a better therapist than me.
Yeah, you won't see too many therapists, maybe other than yourself, be willing to do that. Because with traditional therapy, well, you're not supposed to show emotion. You're supposed to be detached. You're supposed to be like a facility. I thought that was always a bunch of bunk. I think if we can demonstrate genuine emotion for somebody's challenges and mirror that, like we were talking about Shamako, I got a tear in my eye and I choked up. If we can demonstrate that empathy with each other, it's just like, boy, we're just going to create a world where that's going to be a norm rather than the exception.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that would be great. Well, and so I started looking at what was going on and I'm like, this is not like equine therapy because animal assisted equine therapy, you halter the animal, you lead the animal around and the animal performs for you, which really doesn't make me happy at all. This is different. This is relational. This
Yes.
was about one being who had suffered and who was on death's door, connecting with another being who happened to be a human being who was also suffering, who wasn't sure if she wanted to continue on. And they found each other in that moment. And it was absolutely illuminating for me. I mean, I was like, okay, this is good. This is really profound. And then I started thinking, okay, how do I do this? And, then one thing led to another. And we got 20 acres and 70 animals. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, and I saw footage of the Selah Care Farm. I saw the introductory documentary, and it's impressive.
Oh,
And
you saw the trailer.
I
Okay.
saw the trailer, yep.
Nice.
And the other piece is that you offer specific services, groups, retreats. Can you talk a little bit more about if
Sure.
let's say I was a person that wanted to avail myself of services at the Selah Care Farm, what are
Sure.
some of the groups, activities, and do the animals pick who they're going to partner with?
Yeah. They kind of
Okay,
pick you. Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but a little more about the services you
Um,
provide.
well, because I'm a research professor, I started collecting data very early on. The Care Farm's been around a little more than 8 years. So I've been collecting data and publishing since then. And so the data I was collecting was like, what's working for you here and what's not working for you here. What do you wish it would be like here? And so from that, of course, I got these data. Basically, half the people want structure and half the people don't want structure. So of course. So the way that we did it was about 2 weeks a month, we have open programs where people can come and design their own programs. They can come and just be here and spend time with the animals and not get any counseling at all. Or they can get counseling. They can like a la carte. I'll do, 2 hours of counseling a day. I want to do art therapy an hour a day. I'd like to do some somatic therapy or somatic experiencing or yoga or meditation, whatever. They can design their own, or they could just come and be here. And then we have programs that are actually structured that are 4 to 5 days in length. And we have those twice a month. And people come in at a certain time and then they get a little schedule and it says, this is when this is when this is. And it's a more group oriented environment. So, but it's structured. So you have specific times for things. So, we try to meet people where they are because everyone is different. I don't want grieving people to come here and have to fit into the way that, we schedule things. I want to try and accommodate their schedule as much as we can. It makes it a little hard for our counselors, because they have to schedule their lives, but it's worth it for the benefits because it really does benefit people. When people are open to group experience or really prefer a group experience, it's very powerful for them to be in a group. But when people are averse to groups, really it can complicate their emotional stuff
Yep.
to throw them into a group. And that's why we really wanted to personalize it.
Yeah, I think it makes sense because, like you said, not everybody is group ready for a variety of different
Yeah.
reasons. But I think the message of empowerment in terms of meeting you where you're at, allowing the individuals to design their own program,
Yeah.
because I've always believed that grief is disempowering in so many ways, just in terms of the fact that how it debilitates us in the early phases,
Well,
socially,
you have no
psychologically.
choices.
Yeah,
You didn't choose for this to happen to
no,
Janine. Like
no.
what control do you have? Your life is just spun out of control, completely out of control.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I didn't have any say in it, and my life did spin out of control. I mean, I at the time Janine got sick, I was an addictions counselor and a clinical supervisor, and all my training, education, background as a therapist, they didn't prepare me for the road that I had to walk. And I was totally at 47 years old. My midlife crisis, Dr. Joe, was figuring out who the hell I was and what kind of a world was I going to choose to live in now that my daughter was no
Yeah.
longer physically present.
Yeah.
And it required everything that I believed and held near and dear to my heart. It was all out on the table.
Yeah.
And, and, I had to modify the way I thought. It was necessary for me to thrive in a world that was totally different because my
Yeah.
daughter wasn't physically present. So, but yeah, I mean, and the other reason I think it's disempowering is because of, like you said, all the insensitive things that individuals say, like, God needed another angel to till his garden. The one piece that always got me was God won't give you any more that you can bear. And I'm
Yeah.
thinking to myself, if you said that to me, I'd say he already has.
Yeah.
And I would not have found that comforting. So basically, one of the things I talk to my students is here's what to say, here's what I think would be helpful. And if you're not sure, don't say anything but offer your presence.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
My understanding is there's a documentary that A Sacred Place, is that out or is it due to be released, Dr. Joe?
It's a sacred pause.
I'll say,
It's making the rounds in the film festival right now. It's produced by John Bregel. It's called A Sacred Pause. You can find the trailer. It premieres in 2 weeks as an official selection of the Sedona Film Festival, and they had to add 2 showings, and every showing is sold out. So this is interesting to me because grief has never really been a popular kid on the block, and all of a sudden now grief is getting some attention.
well, and the other thing, it showcases the great work that you're doing at the Selah Care Farm. It also, I think the message that we are all one, with the animals and,
We are.
with creation. And the trailer plays that out, I mean, very powerfully. And I just, I'm going to be rooting for its continued success
Thank you.
and that it continues to impact the lives of those people who are fortunate enough to see it. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
We expect it to be available on some public streaming network at some point. So I hope everyone will get an opportunity to see it.
Well, for sure, if it's streamed on Netflix or Amazon Prime, you can bet I'll be one of the first ones to purchase it and purchase it permanently because
Oh,
it's something I will want to watch over and over again. So, Dr. Joe, you've left us, geez, with just so much good stuff tonight, but I've got a couple more questions for you
sure,
before we conclude.
sure.
First thing, if there's one ultimate takeaway or teaching that you would want to leave our audience with today, what would that be?
I mean, I guess today, because of what's going on with the AI thing, what's really coming forward for me, it might be different tomorrow, but today it's treat your feelings like they're a superpower.
Yeah.
I just think it's so important that we learn to feel our feelings and not apologize for them or hide them or feel shame for them or let other people colonize them and tell us what we should and shouldn't feel for how long and how intensely. No, thank you. It's a superpower to feel. It's painful. I get that. You know that for sure, but it's so important.
Well, and I always go back to the quote from the John Green book, The Fault in Our Stars, pain demands to be felt.
Mm, it sure does.
Yes. And um, even now, when I feel the pangs of yearning for my daughter's presence after almost 23 years now, Dr. Joe, I look at that in a way now as a gift because it tells me I can still feel. It tells me that I still love.
Yeah.
And it tells me that, she's always going to be a part of who I am. And I think as I've learned in later grief, the pain that I experience is a reminder of the love that I still have for her.
Yeah. Yeah. She marked you. She marked your life. This is her mark, and it's forever. As long as you're here, separated from her, you're gonna feel that. You're gonna miss her. Of course you are. I mean, it's just so absurd to even intimate that we shouldn't miss such an important person in our lives, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was looking at the back cover of your book and Bearing the Unbearable.
Mm.
And I'm going to read this quote, if you're okay with this.
Yeah, sure.
If you love, you will grieve, and nothing is more mysteriously central to becoming fully human. And that is profound. That is profound. So, and I will quote that with my students too, as well, too. You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you
Oh.
for teaching it because it's not being taught enough.
No, it's interesting. I did a kind of a Google search of the universities across the country that offer a thanatology program or a death and dying class, and the number of universities that don't have it is shocking.
Mm, yeah. Or the ones that do have it, it's often gerontologically focused, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's fine. Have gerontology classes about death and dying, but also have classes about grief and grieving for people who aren't old, like for untimely deaths, for deaths that happen that are catastrophic, right?
Yes. Yeah, and in my class, we talk about traumatic death. We talk about issues that clinicians need to deal with that are unique to cause of death. So we get into the whole full spectrum, including the spiritual aspects of death, as well too, which is extremely important for, I think, students to understand and practitioners to understand,
Of
because those
course.
spiritual aspects help individuals transcend their worst tragedies. So
Well, there is some data to suggest that people who believe in an afterlife cope a
yes,
little bit better, right? And it
yes,
doesn't eradicate their grief, of course. Of course, they still miss their child or parent or sibling or whatever. And also it's different when you think, okay, I'm going to see them again. It's not okay for the moment, but I have a small morsel of hope in the future. And I think that's what those data I think are about.
yeah. Yeah, I think a belief in an afterlife does help us navigate the waters of grief. And, we realize that that belief indicates that, yeah, we're going to see our loved ones again. And, we'll be with them for eternity, or until we opt to, if our soul opts to reincarnate into the physical experience again, then, for the evolution of the soul, then, until that time as well, too. So my last question for you, Dr. Joe, if my listeners want to contact you, purchase your book, find out more about the Selah Care Farm, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, contacting me is rough, but to follow the work, the Selah Care Farm has a website, selahcarefarm.org, SELAH, carefarm.org. The book's available on Amazon or at the publisher, which is Wisdom Publications. The MISS Foundation, if you lost a child, the MISS Foundation is missfoundation.org. And then I have a website for anyone who's grieving. It's just centerforlossandtrauma.com. And there's a lot of free resources on there, free kids books. There's all kinds of great, helpful things on there.
Well, thank you. And I'll make sure all of that, your contact information and links get into the episode notes when the episode goes live. Dr.
Thank
Joe, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you so much for just a wonderful conversation today and for taking time out of, I know it's got to be a busy schedule to spend with me and my listeners. So I'm
you.
grateful. You're welcome.
Thank you and Janine for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you and Cheyenne for being a part of the podcast with me.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.